Well, hello, folks. Welcome to our second night of Agrilachia. We've got a wonderful, awesome evening with Mr. John Moody talking about elderberry. And we're excited that you're here. Our Agrilachia program is brought to you in part by a generous gift from the National Endowment for the Humanities that's made this possible. And this series will run once or twice a month from now to December. After this, our next one is in a couple weeks. We'll have Bill Best talking about seed saving, and then on to just a really awesome fall. So welcome. I hope you are here to learn and get excited about elderberry and listen to John talk about him, the Moody family farms and homesteads on 35 acres in Kentucky. John Moody discovered more than a decade ago that his diet was killing him with duodenal ulcers, seasonal allergies, and other health problems. So the family began the transition to local foods and local food distribution. Eventually, he relocated his family to 35 acres of land to put his learning into practice. He is the author of 5 books, including the Elderberry book, which he'll talk about tonight, and maybe my favorite, it's always on my shelf, The Frugal Homesteader. Part of the team, Moody, Abby's Elderberry, and founder of the Whole Life Buying Club in Louisville, Kentucky. So we welcome Mr. John Moody to our Agrilachia, and he will be here talking about everything elderberry. Let's see here. Let's see. All right. Looks like we're having a little technical difficulty. Let's put both screens in here. Hey, John, can you hear me? Yeah. Because we do not hear you. Let's see. Let's try that. Folks, bear with us. We've got a little bit of technical difficulties. All right. Let's see. There. All right.
Can you hear
Can
me
you hear
yet?
me now?
I can hear you.
I see your voice or your mouth moving, but I don't hear anything yet. No.
It must be on your end.
Oh, there we go. We're good to go.
Found
good
it?
to go. Found it.
Good.
So I think you can share your screen now. And folks, John Moody.
Great. Well, so there's a chat over on the side. So if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about, just drop it in the chat. We'll try and handle it as we work through things. Really excited to be with you all tonight. As Jason said, we have a farm homestead over just an hour to the south and to the west of Louisville, Kentucky. But I love the part of the state you all are in, have some really good and dear
Hey, folks, looks like we are trying to get John's screen showing. And as soon as we get that, once again, we apologize for our technical difficulties. I don't know what to do. All right. Folks, we are trying to get John back. Oh, well, it keeps popping in and out that he's here, but he's yet to load. We'll keep working. Folks, we are still working. John, we cannot see you, or at least I can on my screen. If anybody out there on Facebook land that is watching, let us know if you can see him. On my end, I don't, nor do I hear him.
Sure you cannot see or hear. I mean, if you want to end it and tell me we'll come back in a few minutes.
Oh, he's back. All right.
Here and see now.
See you now, and I can hear you now.
Great. So now don't run away. Let me see if it'll let me screen share.
Okay.
So are you getting a screen share now?
So I've got it in queue, and I'm adding it here, and it should be coming up. Yep, there we go.
Okay, great.
Good to go, folks. Sorry about all that. Now, Mr. Moody.
Great. So I'm so glad you're excited to talk about the elderberry. I'd rather talk to you about it in person, but hopefully now if we have all the tech stuff sorted out, we can at least talk about it together over the internet. And so we fell into homesteading and farming kind of accidentally. I grew up a city slicker on the Lower West Side of Youngstown, Ohio, and moved to Kentucky in 2000, got married in 2005, and we moved out onto a farm in 2010. And it was around 2012 that we planted our first elderberry. I did not know what this plant was. I was at a homesteading conference, and walking around this homesteading conference, there was a booth that was giving out little sticks of wood, it looked like to me, to kids. And so this booth and these guys were just handing kids these sticks saying, you know, go home and stick this in the ground, and in 2 years you'll have an elderberry tree. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. You know, it's like, you just stick this stick in the ground and in 2 years you're going to have a giant tree. This looks like, you know, some kind of broken down, not very good twig. I was like, oh yeah, like just stick it in the ground. So we have a lot of kids. So we came home with a lot of those sticks. I think we planted about a dozen of them, and 7 or 8 of them took. And that is how we got into growing and doing stuff with elderberry. And I just fell in love with this plant over the last decade. There are just no plants quite like the elderberry plant. It has one of the longest and deepest relationships with humanity of any plant you'll find anywhere in the world. You know, probably even more so than coffee and tobacco and some of these other plants. Elderberry goes all the way back to the very beginnings of recorded history. And so tonight we're going to talk about, you know, like, you know, the more common things you might know about the elderberry and the elder, but also I hope to give you an appreciation for all the other amazing things this plant can offer you and offer your homestead or offer your farm. So there's just a little glimpse of where we are now. So we have 35 acres. You know, we raise pigs, we've raised chickens, and until our fencing failed, we were raising some beef cattle. We do a lot of annual and perennial vegetable production, and we just try and have a good time. Sweet potatoes, elderberry, and a few other things are some of our favorite crops, ones we really focus on growing. And we got a gaggle of kids and other stuff going on as well. Always give this disclaimer. So, you know, the elderberry is by nature considered a medicinal plant, but I am not at any time giving you medical advice during this presentation. So I'm going to say all sorts of things about how the elder was used and what studies say about the elder and whatnot. But if you take any information I give in this talk and you do something bad to yourself, that's on you and not on me. So, you know, when we talk about the elder, I look at it generally in the context of, you know, being kind of a homesteader, being a self-sufficient person. If you were looking for a great plant to put on your homestead, what would you want that plant to do for you? What would you want it to provide for you? And, you know, at a conference where I gave this were the kind of responses people gave me. You know, they'd want a plant that'd give them food. They'd want a plant that would give them medicine. They would want a plant that grows easily and vigorously and can grow almost anywhere. And they'd want a plant where the other parts of the plant would be useful if possible. And that is what makes the elder so amazing. It has this long historical food component, whether it's wines and syrups or jellies and juices and pies and all kinds of things it was used for food-wise. But it has, even earlier than the food component, it has a deep and rich medicine history, so much so that Hippocrates referred to it as his medicine chest, and that stuck with the plant for well over 1,000 years. So it's food, it's medicine, but it's even more than that. So the plant was used to make dyes and skincare products. It is excellent for making a wide variety of tools and musical instruments. It was also used to make all natural pesticides and herbicides and other things from the plant. So one of the reasons I hope you will fall back in love with this plant is there just is no plant you can have on your property that will provide as much as an elder plant will provide. There is no other plant I think you can find anywhere in the world that can do as much for you as this plant can do. And it's really just an amazing plant. It is found on pretty much every continent where stuff actually grows. And on every continent, it is found in just about every single country. Here in North America, it goes all the way from Florida up to Maine. It goes from Mexico all the way up through California, all the way up into Canada, and it crosses the entire United States. So it is a plant that once upon a time, writers would joke that you could not walk more than 50 feet without running into an elder. It was just such a prolific, such a well-established plant. And it is a vigorous plant. So it is a plant that will grow 2 to 3 meters, 6 to 8 feet in a single year. And it's a great plant because it's relatively pest and disease resistant. So it's not like some other things we try and grow that tend to want to die. The elder is the type of plant that really wants to live. I'm just going to pop over real quick. Just make sure you all are still there and I'm seeing you. So great. Everybody says loud and clear. So we're going to get back over then to the screen share. So it is a great plant. I'm going to talk a bit about the medicinal side of the plant first. So elderberry's medicinal properties show up in the very earliest of human writings. And it's not just in the Greco-Roman tradition of Hippocrates and Galen and Pliny and all of these cool guys, but it's also in the Native American tradition. So basically, people all over the world all discovered really early that this plant was a potent and beneficial medicinal plant for a wide variety of stuff. So this little slide up here as a remedy for a sore throat is actually from a Nova Scotia calendar that was printed, I think, in like 1793. And so this is a plant you're going to see, real quick, just so I make sure I give credit for the images. All the images in this presentation are either from my elderberry book or they're images I have found doing historical research using some really awesome tools like archive.org and some other places. So we're going to be seeing a lot of historical things. So, and the elder, modern people think about the elder and they are like, man, they usually think of basically the berries and on occasion the flowers. But for most of human history, when people thought about the medicinal aspects of the elder, they were thinking about the leaves. They were thinking about the pith, which is that stuff that fills the hollow branches. They were thinking about the roots and the buds. And so they're thinking about the juice extracted from the wood and the plant materials and whatnot. And so the berries, one of the things that cracked me up when I first looked into it is, early on, when they talk about the berries, it's often as a hair dye or a shoe dye, because they did not feel the berries were nearly as medicinal or useful as the other parts of the plant. And medicinally, it was also used for things like salves and skincare, and all kinds of cool stuff like that. So this is an ad, from the early 1920s, the Chemist and Druggist publication, advertising Sambuline. And you'll notice a lot of elderberry products use that word Sambu. So if you go to the store, there'll be Sambucus, elderberry syrup on the shelf. And that's because one of the earliest words for the elder was Sambu, which meant wind or fire, because one of the earliest practical uses of the elderberry was to make wind-based tools and instruments. I like to joke, if you were one of those kids in middle school who picked up a plastic straw to shoot spitballs at your friends and classmates and teachers, the literature says that kids were doing that, 2.5, 3,000 years ago, using elderberry branches instead of plastic straws. So it's a really, really cool plant. And so, as the people's medicine chest, it was used for everything from influenza, cold, cough, sore throat, headache, asthma, malaria, scarlet fever, measles, syphilis, other fever and eruptive diseases, bruises, inflammation, freckles and sunburns, chapped hands. It was basically, for thousands of years, if you were sick with something in the ancient world, one of the first herbal remedies they would give you would be from the elder, or would contain one part of the elder along with other plants. It was truly just the people's medicine chest. It was used so extensively that John Evelyn, one of the most famous English kind of writers, historians, medical people, said this about the plant, that if the medicinal properties of its leaves, bark, and berries were fully known, I could not tell you what our countryman could ail for, which he might not fetch a remedy from every hedge, either for sickness or wounds. And so Evelyn was in England, and his every hedge remark is not overstatement, because once upon a time in England, and also in the United States, you literally would find the elder in every hedge and along every roadway, because people valued the plant so much, and not only for its medicinal and food benefits, but also for some of the practical benefits we're going to talk about as well. The plant was planted everywhere. You just could not go more than a stone's throw without running into it. And it was just great, great, great. And so again, most modern people really only appreciate the berries. And the berries are fabulous. There is some good preliminary research showing that elderberries contain a number of really beneficial compounds that not only stop viral attachment, so for viruses to get going in your body, they have to attach to your cells. And so some of the studies that have been done on elderberry show that some of the chemicals in the berries can help stop viruses from being able to attach to your cells. And these chemicals also inhibit viruses and bacteria from replicating. The elderberry also has been studied even by the U.S. military. And in their research, they showed that taking elderberry helps people overcome stress, so lack of sleep, difficult circumstances, physical stress, emotional stress, all that kind of stuff. So the military was really impressed with the benefits of elderberry, for basically adapting and overcoming. Now, do you want to talk about really briefly with the elderberry? The elderberry is also a possibly dangerous plant. And that's because it contains two different classes of chemicals that can cause some problems for you. The first are alkaloids, and then the second is cyanide-forming glucosids. And so the first one, the alkaloids, are also why the elder is beneficially medicinal. And it's why, if you're going to get into, herb crafting with the elder, and especially moving beyond the berries and the flowers, you want to get something like Stephen Booner's herbal antivirals and herbal antibiotic books, and make sure you are working with somebody who has a lot of experience making herbals from other parts of the plant, because the alkaloids, while medicinally beneficial, if taken wrong, taken in the wrong form, taking too much, can make you really, really sick. The second chemical in the elder doesn't really have any medicinal benefits. Cyanide just wants to straight up kill you. Now, the good news is it's really, really hard to kill yourself with cyanide from the elder. But most of the time, if people give them cyanide poisoning from the elder, you just get some nausea, really bad cramping, vomiting, and diarrhea. So you really, really have to do something really dumb to give and even then you really have to do something really dumb to give yourself a bad case of cyanide poisoning with the elder. So, but this is why historically things made from the elder were heated or fermented, because cyanide breaks down at around 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And so both fermentation or gentle simmering in just a few minutes, will remove the cyanide. And this is also why for crafting with elder wood, Native Americans and Europeans would dry the wood thoroughly on a warm, sunny day, or they would use heat to carefully dry the wood of the elder to drive the cyanide out of the wood. So then, you can blow on the whistles, you can play the flutes and whatnot that you can make from the elderberry without risk of cyanide poisoning. And you might be asking, well, why does this plant contain cyanide in the first place? It's just good to realize being eaten is a bad reproduction strategy. And so very few things in nature want to be eaten. Now, animals, they have thick hides, or they're really fast. They have sharp claws. And as soon as we invented spears and bows and arrows and then rifles, that took care of animal defense systems for being eaten. But plants can't run away. So plants, to keep from being eaten, seek to poison the eater. And elderberry is not the only plant that does that. So like your potatoes and your tomatoes and your peppers are in the nightshade family. And so they contain inflammatory compounds and stuff and whatnot. So all different plants don't want to be eaten. Elderberry just decided to go the cyanide route in terms of keeping you from eating it. So when it comes to the berries for elderberry, this is one of the areas that is still slightly contested. University of Missouri did some research on the American elderberry, and that's the canadensis variety, since in America, we actually have 3 elderberries. For our part of the country, Kentucky and surrounding states, the elderberry you're going to come across most often is the canadensis American elderberry. If you go out west, you'll get to see the absolutely amazing blue elderberry. And then up into Michigan and across the center part of the country, down into Mexico, and then also up through the west, you'll come across the red, the Rasmosa elderberry as well. But usually when we're talking about elderberry, we're talking about the American canadensis, or we're talking about blue. But for tonight, we're really going to stay focused on canadensis. And what the University of Missouri found was that fully ripe canadensis elderberries were cyanide free. This is not true of European elderberries. And one thing to realize is over 99.5% of elderberry products in America are made with European elderberries, not American elderberries. And so when you're buying dried elderberries, for instance, unless you know you're sourcing from one of the few American growers who sells, dried American elderberries, you're going to be dealing with European elderberries. Whereas if you're foraging and whatnot here around Kentucky and adjoining states, you're going to be dealing with American canadensis elderberries. So just keep that in mind. So, and if you're dealing with canadensis elderberries, the research out of University of Missouri shows that those should be safe to eat fresh, right off the bush, without any heating or fermentation. I always, though, recommend that you test this by eating a small amount and seeing how they treat you and seeing if you like them, fresh off the bush. So that's kind of, where the right berry stuff is. And so at this point, I'm going to pause and just check to see if there's any questions so far. Because I want to make sure I don't get too deep into it. So I'm looking at the chat. So does anybody have any questions so far? Gail, you say wine or jelly. Oh yeah, like the berries and the flowers have a really long history of being used in both wines and jellies, soups. I found a recipe for elderberry ketchup in my historical research. So pies, muffins, sky's the limit for how you can use, the flowers and the berries on the elderberry. Yeah. And so, if you want to grow elderberry, hop on back over. Well, and yeah, maybe I'll save that story for later. Yeah. And so this gives you an idea of when it comes to elderberry wood, the wood of the elder makes incredible crafts and tools. So you can make pop guns out of the wood. You can make amazing flutes. So both for Native Americans and for traditional European cultures, pretty much all over Europe, every nation has a flute, a style of flute made from elder wood that is traditional to that nation, to those people. It's so cool to see that. And it's also true in Native American history that, all across America, Native Americans had traditional flute making techniques specifically for elder wood, and also making whistles. You can make pop guns and potato guns. Me and my kids were watching Bear Grylls, his, survival TV show. And it was, I think, the second episode of the first season. He finds himself in the wild and he needs to start a fire. And he looks for a piece of elder wood, because elder wood is excellent for starting fire and using as the bevel, the spin piece, when you're making a friction fire with a bow. So it's a really, really very useful plant beyond just, using the berries, using the flowers. So this is a picture from a book called The American Boy's Handy Book, which I think was written in the 1800s. And this book has a ton of different tools young boys could make, including an elderberry spear, elderberry pop gun, and other things. So among other neat projects for kids. So the craft and wood side of the plant alone make it absolutely great to grow. And so you might be asking, well, since elderberry are everywhere, why would I bother to plant it when I can just forage it? And for me, I see this as not an either or, but a both and. So on our property and around our property, there are a lot of wild elderberry, but we have also planted a bunch of cultivated varieties. And there's a number of different reasons for this. So one of the major problems with wild elderberries is they often suffer from fruit drop and uneven ripening. And so cultivated varieties just make harvesting and processing berries so much easier and so much more efficient. So if you can do cultivated varieties, you're going to get a lot greater yields for a lot less work, and you're going to get better quality. So, another thing we found, at least in our area, is a lot of the elderberry bushes are really, really hard to get to. They're along ditches and sinkholes and land features that can make it a little bit difficult to outright dangerous to harvest. And so planting them, you're going to put them somewhere that it's easy to get at them. It's going to be easy to harvest. And then the final thing I didn't get to include it in this presentation, but research has shown that normally wild foods are more nutritious than cultivated plants. So as we've bred plants and kind of pushed plants to grow bigger and grow faster, we've lost the nutrition in a lot of plants, where now, it takes like 8 oranges now to get the same amount of vitamin A that a single orange used to contain for my grandparents. And you have to eat, twice as many green beans now to get the same amount of calcium that the green beans my grandparents ate. So there's all this good research showing that over the last 100 years, our food supply has suffered a lot of nutrition loss because of how we've been kind of growing things and how we've been tampering with their genetics. But with the elderberry, the research we have shows that actually cultivated plants are generally more nutritious than their wild counterparts, especially for the parts of the plants that really matter. So if you want to grow elderberry, it is super easy to grow and a super affordable plant to get into growing. And it all starts basically by choosing, 3 to 4 different elderberry varieties that are appropriate for your zone and your location. Because there are now, I think, over 50 American elderberry cultivars available. So there is a lot of different elderberries now available commercially on the market. So you just want to choose 3 or 4 to start with. And you want to get 3 to 6 hardwood cuttings of each one. Because the hardwood cuttings for elderberry are a fraction of the cost of buying live plants. So you can usually get a dozen hardwood cuttings for the cost of one single plant. And so you're going to get these hardwood cuttings. You're going to amend a growing area where you want to plant the elderberry. You're going to amend that soil, prep that soil. You're going to stick the hardwood cuttings into the ground, and then you're going to see who wins. And it really is, in terms of, you could really make growing elderberry that simple if you don't want to get into the weeds and make it, an overly difficult thing to grow elderberry. So I'm going to pop back over to the chat real quick, see if there's any questions. So Sandra asks, is now a good time to start a cutting from a wild elderberry? So normally you take cuttings, hardwood cuttings, because you can also do softwood cuttings. So normally you do hardwood cuttings when the plant is fully asleep. So that's generally in late December to early January. That being said, I know lots of people who are very successful taking hardwood cuttings from the elderberry just about any time. It is a really, really it's a plant that wants to grow. So you could do hardwood cuttings right now. I just encourage you to be very careful with taking hardwood cuttings while the plant is alive. And especially make sure you're taking it from plants that are not stressed or otherwise under duress and whatnot, or a plant that's having any pest or disease issues. So, but really, I'm not against taking cuttings from wild elderberry. There's a couple wild elderberry in our area that have a lot of potential from what I've seen from them. So if you're going to do cuttings from wild elderberries, really look for plants that have the properties of what you want. And so I'm looking for, really good berry size, really good cluster size. I want plants that produce really big berries on really big clusters. I want clusters that show even ripening. So the more even ripening of the clusters, the better. So if you're going to propagate from wild elderberry, be choosy and really look for the best plants possible to propagate from. So, Brennan asked, are there varieties that should not be consumed at all? So, traditionally, Brennan, every single variety of elderberries, berries, have been used historically. So, to go over the varieties again real quick, in Europe, that family of elderberry that we mainly talk about, and the one that's like all the rage medicinally, is Sambucus nigra, the dark or the black elderberry, because its berries are so dark. And they produce a very, very dark juice. Now, here in the United States, we actually do have a lot of nigra bushes, especially in the Northeast, since when people came over from Europe to America over hundreds and hundreds of years, they brought plants with them, and so sometimes, especially in the Northeast, though also on occasion in other parts of the country, you can come across nigra. Though generally speaking, you're going to come across canadensis. So in America, you have canadensis or American elderberry, you have the blue elderberry, and you have the red elderberry racemosa. And while all three of those were used historically by the Native Americans and then by other groups in America, the red elderberry was the least used. It's the least palatable. It's the hardest to work with. It is the most poisonous. And so, it doesn't at least grow in this region very well from what I've seen. So I say, grow blue elderberry, grow American canadensis elderberry. I don't see much reason to or benefit to grow the red elderberry. Even though you can grow it, you can harvest the berries from it, and you can process and use them. They are just not nearly as much fun to work with as the canadensis or the blue elderberries. So Becky asks, are there suppliers online that sell cuttings? There are. But for those, because, if you all are over, if everybody on tonight is over kind of in the Appalachia area, we actually have a great Kentucky farm over that way. It is Wade Wingham's farm. And I can probably pop onto my Facebook, and I've been to their farm. They grow elderberries. They're they're, like an hour and a half or so south of Lexington off of 75. And so while you can order cuttings online from people, I would say it'd be great to support Wade and his farm if they have enough cuttings available. If Wade and them don't have sufficient cuttings available, then I recommend using a farm out of New Jersey. His name is Michael Brown, and his farm's name is Pitts Pone Farm, Pitspone Farm. And he's located in New Jersey. And so I can get Jason that info, and he can toss it in the show notes and stuff, or send it to attendees. But Michael is who, if Wade doesn't have cuttings I need, or is sold out, or Wade doesn't have cultivars that I want to try, then I'll use Michael to get those, because he's a great grower, does a lot of really cool, elderberry and other plant propagation stuff, and just super, super cool guy. So any other questions at this point before I hop back on over to the world of slides? And so, want to talk about some other reasons why you might want to grow the elder beyond food and medicine. And so the elder is a really, really useful, practical plant. And so, this is, I believe, from Culpeper, or this might even predate Culpeper. The Culpeper says the same thing. But the elderberry, once upon a time, was so well known as a plant that all of the major herbal and botanical books written for 1,000 years would not even bother to tell you what it looked like. So imagine a plant that was so well known by everybody that it was the only plant in an entire book of 1,000 plants that contained no description. And one of the reasons everybody knew what the elder looked like was because it was grown everywhere. And the reason it was grown everywhere is not only was it, so useful for food and medicine and wood and craft, but the plant is a great plant practically. So the Romans discovered very early on that, when you go to put a road in, because that's, we often think of Romans and their roads. When you go to put a road in, you disturb the sides of the road, all that earth moving and that earth working and whatnot. And roads shed all of this water onto the sides and into the ditches along the roads. And so the Romans, you have this problem where you disturb the earth, and now you've created this impermeable surface that causes water to run off and erodes the side of the earth on the sides of the roads. And that's no good for the road. And the Romans discovered, I shouldn't really say discovered because others knew this, so they just kind of, really ran with it. They would plant elderberry all along the side of roads because it grows quickly. It has a very, very shallow but extensive root system. And so one reason elder was used for hedges alongside roads or all in these other places is because it allowed you to stabilize the earth. And the elder is a water loving plant. And so it does great along sides of roads, in ditches, in places where water runs, or oh yeah, so this is the Pliny quote. So this, I believe, is from, probably around, the 180s AD, Pliny the Elder. And so he points out there's no reason to give a description of the elder, because every boy knows it for making, pop guns. So it's just an amazing plant for that reason. Such an incredible history. But practically speaking, the plant is fabulous, because you can use it for living fences. One of my favorite quotes about the elder was how it was used in England to keep minchers out of your garden. And so minchers are, if you're familiar with the Lord of the Rings and our little hobbit friends, Pippin and Merry, how they would go to the farmer Maggot's farm, and they would minch produce from Farmer Maggot, which is why Farmer Maggot did not take kindly to the young lads. Farmer Maggot should have planted an elder hedge, because another reason elder were planted so much throughout Europe was, basically as a living fence. So in Greco-Roman cultures, they would often plant elder in inner courtyards in their open air houses. So often in Roman architecture, you have an inner courtyard that's, where stuff is grown in a sitting area. And they would plant elder to make a living hedge, a courtyard within that courtyard, made out of elder. So it is just really, really great practical plant on your homestead, because you can use it as a windbreak. You can use it for erosion control. You can use it as a living fence to help contain certain animals, depending on what variety you plant and what density you allow to get it to. But food-wise, the elder was used in so much. This was a really, really neat book I found called The Natural History of Coffee, Chocolate, Tea, and Tobacco. And in this book, which is a history of coffee, chocolate, tea, and tobacco, it has an entire insert all about how to use elder and juniper berries in coffee houses and whatnot. So really, really fascinating piece of history. Really cool book. But elderberry was just used for so much. You'll find recipes for soups, for syrups and cordials. It was just, this is that ketchup recipe that I was referring to. And by the way, if you didn't know this little piece of history, ketchup, originally, ketchup did not mean tomatoes. So Americans think of ketchup as a tomato-based condiment, but the word ketchup literally means fermented fish. And so, originally ketchup was made with fermented fish, and then we added tomatoes to it, and then we dropped the fish. But that fermented fish sauce that was known as ketchup wasn't just made with tomatoes. It was made with elderberries, or all different kinds of fruits, because tomatoes are a fruit, were added to this fermented fish sauce to make ketchups. Elderberries are also used historically in lots of marinades and other situations. So it's pretty cool. So, here is just some more on the medicinal side, using elder leaves. It was really common to take elder leaves and gently boil them in oil to extract their beneficial compounds. And then this boiled elder leaf mixture was used medicinally for 1,000 or more years. And so super useful plant. We already looked at some of these, and the flowers as well. were used as an anti-inflammatory. So the buds were used to treat scurvy. There's just kind of, no stopping point. Here's that full calendar. So this full Nova Scotia calendar from where I pulled just the little thing about using the berries to treat sore throats and to keep a sore throat from becoming a full-born illness. So it's a plant that's just going to give you so much. Elderberry was also used, just, more super cool practical things. You can see some of the beautiful dyeing type things you can do with elderberry, especially if you know the right mordants to combine with the elderberries to get the staying power and colors you're looking for. But elderberry not only was used as a hair dye in Greco-Roman times, but it was also used for shoe blacking, and it was used for making writing ink. So, the sky is the limit. Basically, I tell people it would take a lifetime to explore all the amazing ways you can use the elder plant. It is a plant that just is never, ever going to run out of uses and benefits. And so, yeah. And so, what is Wade's last name for Angeline? It is Wingham. I think it's spelled Wingham. I'm going to pop over. Well, wonder if I can get on to Facebook and find Wade real quick. So, and not crash my internet since, let's see if I can find Wade. I know Facebook is so Wade. No, Wade. Here it is. Wade. So Whigham for our friend Wade. And so they're over off of 75. Yeah, so really awesome couple, really great farm. So look them up. So and they're a great place locally to get elderberry starts from, and they're not at all far from where you all are. So other questions, other comments? Because I'm going to tell you my favorite, absolutely favorite piece of elderberry lore. And so one thing to realize with the elderberry, I'm going to go over to some more pictures because I just have I have hundreds and hundreds of historical images of the elderberry. And so some of these are actually from Kentucky. But of all my... Yes, I've found, this is Winchester News. So you go back and this is, from Winchester, Kentucky, the neglected elderberry. There's just, I don't think there's any plant that appears as much in world and American history as the elderberry plant. So it's just such a fun and fascinating plant. Lots of different uses for the flower. So great plant. But my favorite piece of elder lore, so because again, the elderberry has so much lore and history behind it. And so like if you've read the Emperor's New Clothes or The Ugly Duckling, all these traditional stories from Hans Christian Andersen, the elderberry was so popular that when he put his original compiled works together of all of his stories, there was one entire story just about the elder tree mother. And so, especially in Europe, elder occurs multiple times in the works of Shakespeare. It occurs in Monty Python. If you're a Monty Python fan, one of my favorite elderberry references is your mother was a hamster and your father smelt of elderberries by the insulting freshman in Monty Python's Quest for the Holy Grail. But my absolute favorite piece of elderberry lore and history is from Sesame Street. And so, how many of you have watched Sesame Street? And if you're somebody like me who grew up watching Sesame Street, did you ever wonder why a vampire is who taught you how to count numbers? These are the kinds of things that kept me awake at night as a child. Why? Because like on Sesame Street, you have all these very relatively normal characters. And then you have a vampire teaching children their numbers. Why was a vampire the mathematician on Sesame Street? And what does that have to do with elderberry? Well, let's go back in history, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years to Eastern Europe. And in Eastern European history, there was a time where people were really, really worried that a vampire was going to break in their house and eat them and their family at night. And so you had to protect yourself from vampires. If you were going to protect yourself from a vampire, how would you do it? What would be your go-to defense to keep you and your family safe from vampires? Well, you might be thinking wooden stake. You might be thinking garlic. You might be thinking holy water. But before pretty much all of those anti-vampire, deterrent things, before all of that, people were using elderberries to try and keep vampires out of their homes. And the reason they would use elderberries is vampires' earliest weakness, more than garlic and holy water and all this other stuff, is vampires suffer from obsessive compulsive counting disorder. So a vampire's earliest weakness is their inability not to count things. And for those of you who have harvested elderberries before, you will quickly realize when you think about it that a nice big cluster of elderberries represents an uncountable thing. So in Eastern Europe, people would set clumps of elderberries on their windowsills in the evening before they went to bed, with the idea that if a vampire came along, started to climb up into your house to get a midnight snack on you and your family, he'd come across these elderberry clusters and he'd have to start counting the elderberries. And he'd start to count the elderberries and he would fail. And he'd start to count the elderberries again and he would fail. And the sun would begin to rise and the vampire would have to run away and you would be safe. And that is why the Count on Sesame Street is a vampire, because whoever, wrote Sesame Street knew their medieval Eastern European history so well to know that vampires are counting specialists. So the elder is just amazing plant. So much history. So Brennan asks about pruning. Wild elderberries, you obviously don't need to prune. If you're growing cultivated elderberries, they benefit greatly from pruning. Some varieties actually, once established, are so vivacious growing wise that farmers who are commercially growing elderberry will ground prune the plants. So they will basically cut the plants completely back to just 4 to 6 inches tall every single season. And as long as you have your fertility right and your soil management right, and you have sufficient moisture, the plant will completely regrow from the ground and fruit that following year. So it's really, really just such a vigorous plant in terms of growth. And so cultivated varieties absolutely benefit from pruning and other care. And again, it's great because when you prune the plant, as long as your prunings have no disease or no pest issues, you either get some really cool wood for crafting with, or you can just start more plants. And we can once again, hopefully in another 10 or 20 years, have elderberry from, every 50 feet all across the United States. So then, is it better to work with fresh or dried berries? Fresh berries are absolutely better than dried berries. So because no matter what, when you dry things, you lose some of the beneficial compounds. So for our elderberry syrup business, because we, years ago, before I wrote the elderberry book, right about the same time, this would have been about 4 years ago, we saw all of the interest in elderberry. And so we decided to start an elderberry syrup business since we were growing elderberries and just had a lot of experience with the plant. And studies show, and our experience making syrup and other things with the berries show that the fresh berries are better than dried berries. And so if you can work with the fresh berries, it is fabulous. And so Cherie says, I have harvested the berries, and it's very tedious to get them off the stems, and to get all the tiny stems out. So, couple things you can do to make fresh berry harvest easier. Again, this is one reason cultivated varieties, where you're making sure they have good fertility, they can often have berries that are twice as large as wild varieties. Though I've seen some really, really great wild elderberries out there. But one thing you can do, and this is how we generally process our fresh elderberries, is I'll go see if I can find the pictures, because you all will enjoy seeing the pictures of this. These are in the book. So let's see if I can find you. But what we will do is we will harvest into cloth-lined bins. So we have these nice big bins that we use, and we'll harvest into these bins. Let's go find some pictures. And so we will harvest into bins. Hey, there's the count. So here's a picture of the bins. So we'll harvest elderberries into these cloth-lined bins, and we will drop the bins into a chest freezer for about 24 hours. And then we will, the freezing process makes a lot of the berries separate from the stems. And so that's one way to do it, is to freeze the berries. One elderberry person I know will actually place the clusters of berries into very large, I think it's the gallon or 2-gallon Ziploc freezer bags. And they'll put a couple big clusters into the freezer bag, seal the freezer bag, drop it in the freezer, let it freeze overnight. I thought this was really cool. We didn't get to try it this year. And then they'll take a pair of scissors and cut a small like spout in the bottom corner of the bag. And then they'll just shake. And the berry, they'll shake the bag a lot, and they'll gently work the bag, and all the berries will fall out that little spout. And then they'll remove all the residual branches and whatnot. And so that's the way to do it. My personal favorite way to process elderberries, and if you harvest right, meaning you harvest berries usually late in the morning after recent rains, that makes harvest, that gives you the best quality berries to harvest, and that makes it the easiest to get them off the stems, because one reason a lot of people have trouble with their berries getting them off the stems is they harvest later in the day. And so as a day like today wears on in Kentucky, we were 90 degrees, we were full sun. And so early in the morning, plants are pushing moisture out to the plant. So they're pushing all this moisture out to the plant. And the plant is really well hydrated late morning. And as the day wears on, the plant stresses. And that push, all that moisture the plant is pushing, weakens. And that's why plants droop later in the day, because they have trouble pushing enough moisture out to the very edges. And so people tend to want to harvest elderberries later in the day or in the evening when there's the least amount of pressure and the least amount of moisture to make the berries quickly and easily come off of the clusters. So you'll also make your life a lot easier and get better quality berries if you can try and do your harvesting in the late morning after the dew has dried on the plants. So what we like to do is we like to harvest in the morning. We'll come home, and then you can use a fine-toothed comb, or I'm to the point where we've just gotten so used to it, we just run our fingers over the clusters very quickly. And as a family of there's 7 of us, we'll just quickly work through 5-10 pounds of elderberries real quick, and I will then run them through our steam juicer, and it produces just such a fabulous final product. So let's see which folder I put the steam juice pictures in. And so I really, really like steam juicing. So this real quick, I'll show this. This is what hardwood cuttings look like. Good hardwood cuttings will have at least 2 growth nod points. And by growth nods, I mean you see here, or you see here on this one, or here, here and here on this one. A reputable cutting person, or if you're doing cuttings yourself, you want at least 2 of these points of growth on your cuttings. So there should be a total of 4 possible nods to hardwood cutting points. So let's see if this is, yeah. And so this is what came out of our steam juicer. Just really, really, really happy with the steam juicer. and the quality of elderberry juice it produces, and the color and flavor it produces and stuff. So really like a steam juicer for steaming down berries. This is us harvesting some of our cultivated berries this year. That's my son Caleb, just taking care of some cultivated berry harvesting. And then guess this is from earlier in the year, us wild harvesting some of the flowers just off of some fields in my neighbor's land that they gave us permission to go wild berry harvesting. I think I had one more folder of some elderberry pictures. Yeah, so it's such a fun plant. Another reason I like to do both cultivated and wild elderberry. Yeah, here's August. So this is when we did some more foraging. And this goes back to my point about harvesting, foraging for elderberries. The bushes can sometimes be really difficult to get to. Though I've heard over in, the eastern part of Kentucky, the bushes are a lot easier to handle and get to. But at least where we are, a lot of the best bushes are just, sinkholes, really bad ditches. Takes a lot of work to get to them, to get the berries out. But if you like elderberries, it can be worth the extra effort. So hop back over to the chat. Yeah, and so if the berries are real small, a comb may not be helpful. Again, you may want to just straight up freeze them and then see if the bag approach works for you. Or see if after they're frozen, if the comb works better. And I don't worry about a small bit of stem material when we're juicing the berries. So especially if you're going to be, because steam juicing uses heat, that takes care of any concerns with the alkaloids and any concerns with the cyanide that is in the stems. So you can just totally get after it. And, don't worry about a small amount of stem and branchy material being in with the berries, because we've been doing this for many years, working with both dried berries and other stuff, and it's never posed an issue. So cool. So I'm going to go try and find one more quick picture. It's one of my favorites. It's that Hans Christian. I can find it. See, I don't know. It's probably in the, maybe I can just hold it up from the elderberry, or I might be able to Google it. But it's, it's just a really, really fabulous plant. Super beautiful. So speaking of, you can also make pencils from elderberry, and then, also make your own ink from elderberry. So how about that? This is one of my other favorite ones from the American Boy Handy Book. So this is your, making an elder spear to use for fishing and for frog hunting and whatnot. So that's super, super cool. Really great. Just an absolutely fabulous plant. So I hope you've learned a lot about it tonight. Here's from the American Handy Boys book. So this is how to make a simple elder pop gun. So yeah, so much you can do with this plant. So I'm super glad that, the Hindman settlement people will hopefully have a lot of great ideas of what they can do with this plant, and fun ways you all can incorporate it. Because again, historically, all through Appalachia, this plant was used to make toys and crafts, along with making wines and jellies and all kinds of other stuff. You could really do like an entire festival just around this one plant in all of its history and usefulness.
John, thank you so much for an absolute tremendous evening talking about elderberry, and I will throw in talking about toys. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and my grandpa always talked about making pop guns and water guns out of elderberry, and I was probably 9 or 10 years old, and so he made me a pop gun and a water gun out of elderberry. And I still have them, and it was just the neatest thing because it's what Papa did, and I played with them a lot too. So
you have some that he made?
I do.
You gotta send me some pictures.
I'll send you a picture. I will.
Because America has a really awesome history with elderberry, but it doesn't have, like in Europe, all of the pictures and other things that, like, because again, elderberry was so popular that it became a joke. And that's why Monty Python refers to it. Because just, you truly are a plant that has reached epic status when you become a joke in mainstream movies.
Yep.
And in America, we don't, I'm just always looking for more, firsthand people in American history who have worked with this plant. It can share, how they traditionally crafted with it and what their crafts looked like and other stuff. So that's awesome.
I'll get some pictures and send to you. So thank you so much for a wonderful evening. And folks, thanks for tuning in to Agrilachia. We got another one coming up on September the 24th. We'll have Bill Best here talking about seed saving and the wonderful history that we have with our rich green bean culture here in the mountains.
Great. Well, again, thank you all for having me. I hope you have a great evening.
Thanks, guys.